All right, so today we're diving into something pretty profound, huh? You sent in this sermon from John MacArthur, Creation, Believe It or Not, Part 2. And, well, it's a question that's kind of always been around, hasn't it? Creation versus evolution. Where do you even begin with something that big?
Well, what's fascinating, right? Because, this isn't just some theological debate. It's like the foundation for how we understand everything.
Totally. Are we talking about a random universe, or is there like a blueprint, a builder? And MacArthur, he doesn't really beat around the bush, does he? He's pretty clear, literal six-day creation, just like Genesis says.
And what's interesting is he points out that while we can kind of see evidence for a creator all around us to really understand how it all happened, we have to go back to what's been revealed.
And that brings us to the Bible, right? Specifically, Genesis. He makes a big deal about Genesis not just being some story, but the origin story for everything. And I don't just mean stars and planets, but order, life, even things like marriage, government.
Like walking onto a construction site and finding the blueprints. He's saying Genesis, those are the blueprints.
Yeah.
If you want to get how the whole building works, got to start there.
Right.
He argues that once you start questioning any of Genesis, it's like, where's the line?
Yeah, that domino effect, right?
Yeah.
Question creation, and then what? What happens to the whole Bible?
Exactly. And that's something even a lot of believers really wrestle with. And he kind of gets into, ideas like theistic evolution, progressive creationism.
So for those of us who maybe aren't theologians, we're talking about people who believe in God, but they're trying to make that work with the idea of evolution happening over millions, even billions of years.
Right. And MacArthur doesn't let anyone off easy here. He challenges that thinking by basically saying, look at the violence, the death that's kind of inherent in how evolution works.
Yeah, he asked this really interesting question. How could a loving God look at a world that was made through this brutal process and call it good, like it says in Genesis? That seems like a contradiction.
It really makes you think. He also talks about how people are quick to condemn things, abortion, euthanasia, right? It's wrong, morally wrong. But then there's this struggle with the idea of a literal six-day creation when it's like right there in the Bible.
So is he saying there's some kind of selective reading of the Bible going on?
Yeah, his argument is, look, if you're going to call the Bible the Word of God, you got to wrestle with all of it, even the parts that maybe make you uncomfortable or that seem to clash with what we currently understand.
Especially, I mean, with modern science and how it often seems to contradict these ideas. But here's where it gets even more interesting. MacArthur says that science, things like DNA and how complex that genetic information is, actually points towards the need for an intelligent designer.
And that's where he brings up information theory, which sounds very complicated.
Okay, yeah, break that down for us a bit. What's information theory in this context?
Well, it basically says that information that's complex, like we see with the genetic code and DNA, it can't just appear out of nowhere. There has to be a source, some intelligence behind it. He even mentions scientists like A.E. Wilder-Smith who've argued this.
So it's like saying you can't just have a bunch of ingredients and poof, there's cake, right? It takes a recipe, a baker, a whole process to get to that cake.
Exactly. And he seems to be saying the universe, with how intricate it is, it's just too much to be pure chance.
hmm
There had to be a plan and a planner behind it. Even now, with all our technology, we can't create life from scratch. We can mess with existing life, but actual creation, a living organism with DNA and all that, we haven't gotten there.
It's like, when you see a watch lying in the desert, you just know somebody made that. It didn't just kind of appear from sand and wind, right?
Right. And the more we discover about life, how complex it really is, it's like harder to think it all just happened randomly. MacArthur, he even uses this example of, scientists cloning sheep to make this point.
Okay, now that's a comparison I haven't heard before. So how does cloning sheep fit into all of this?
Well, he's saying even with all our scientific advances, right, we can't actually create life, like from nothing. We can play around with existing life, sure, but to make a living thing with that DNA coding and all the amazing complexity, that's still way beyond us.
So wait, you're telling me we can't even make a computer that like repairs itself, but we're supposed to believe that a single-celled organism somehow just, I don't know, became every plant and animal on Earth through just luck?
It's a tough one to grasp. And, MacArthur actually argues that even Darwin himself, if he were alive today, seeing what we know about genetics now, he might have had to rethink some things. Because to say you believe in God and accept the reality of DNA, how information actually works, you got to acknowledge there was a creation moment,
Huh.
a starting point that wasn't just random.
So it's less about like faith versus science and more about which story actually makes more sense with the evidence, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what I find really interesting is how he brings this back around to us, our everyday lives. He's saying the choice we make, whether we believe in, and I'm quoting him here, an eternal God or an eternal amoeba, that has huge implications for how we see our purpose,
Hmm.
what we believe happens after we die, all of that.
Whoa. Okay, that's a pretty stark choice. So it's like, are we living in a universe that has meaning, created by a God who cares, or as MacArthur puts it, are we all just kind of a cosmic accident, just random atoms with no real meaning? That's kind of bleak when you put it that way.
He doesn't really sugarcoat it, and he says, a world without a creator, that's a world with no inherent purpose, no absolute morality.
So for someone listening right now, maybe thinking, okay, this is all very philosophical and everything, but what's the takeaway for me, like on a Tuesday morning? What am I supposed to do with this?
I think what he really wants is for us to ask those big questions. Don't shy away from them. Look at the evidence from science, from spirituality, and see what feels true. He's not saying it's going to be easy, but he is saying it matters. It matters deeply.
He wants us to think about like our place in all of this. Are we just a cosmic accident? Or are we part of something much, much bigger, something that was designed? Makes you think, huh.
And that's really what it boils down to, isn't it? This whole creation versus evolution debate. It's not really about which scientific theory is right. It's about grappling with why we're even here, where we come from, what happens after we die.
And I think what's so fascinating is that no matter where you personally land on that whole spectrum, just asking those questions, that's incredibly powerful.
Absolutely, and that's something I really appreciate about how MacArthur approaches this. He wants us to be curious. Don't be afraid of the tough questions, even if the answers might surprise us.
And to be open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story than we can see under a microscope. In Romans, it says that God's made his existence clear through what he made, so anyone who rejects him is without excuse.
That's quite a statement.
That kind of makes me think of that scene in Contact, that movie with Jodie Foster. Her character, she's a scientist, and she sees this evidence of intelligent design in space, and she's just like, they should have sent a poet. It's like maybe scientists, they're not always wired for the big picture, you know what I mean?
It's a thought-provoking idea, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, could it be that trying to explain everything scientifically sometimes makes us miss the bigger picture?
Right. And maybe, just maybe, faith isn't about like leaving your brain at the door. Maybe it's about using your brain, your gut, everything to understand ourselves and this whole universe in a deeper way.
It's not blind faith, right? It's informed belief. MacArthur even says, think about it, it actually takes more faith to believe this universe with how complex and ordered it is, that it just made itself, than to believe in a creator God.
He talks about how in Hebrews it says, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. It really does take faith to look at something as amazing as the universe and be like, yeah, this wasn't an accident, this was intentional.
That's where that whole leap of faith comes in, right? It's
Yeah.
like recognizing that some things, we may never fully understand them, but that doesn't mean we can't have faith in something bigger.
Trusting that there's more to the story, more than what we can see, touch, measure.
And maybe even like being okay with a little mystery,
So where does this leave someone who's really trying to figure all this out? What would you say to them?
I'd probably just echo what MacArthur's saying. He's like, don't shy away from those big questions.
Mhm.
Read Genesis. See what science has to say. But also, like, look around you. Pay attention to the world.
Right. Look for the design, the order.
Exactly. All that complexity.
Mhm.
And just ask yourself, what if this is pointing to something bigger than us?
Approach it with a sense of wonder, not fear.
Because really, this isn't just some intellectual exercise. This is personal.
This is about what you believe, about the world, your place in it, about what happens after all of this, if anything.
And like MacArthur said, how you answer those questions, it changes how you live, how you treat others, what gives your life meaning.
So if we really sit with this idea that God created the universe in 6 days, just like Genesis says, what does that mean for you listening right now? Does it change how you see everything around you, the course of history, your place in it all? This isn't just some debate about science and religion. It's about the biggest questions there are, the questions of existence itself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.